Hello and a warm welcome to the viewers of ETV Bharat. I'm Smita Sharma. We are continuing with our special series, Battleground USA 2020, that focuses on the upcoming big presidential polls in the United States in November this year. And today we are going to talk about one aspect that, of course, affects India directly. And India will be watching closely to see whether it is going to be the Trump administration or the Biden administration, especially when it comes to issues of bread and butter, economy, and trade. And to talk about this issue, I'm joined by two very special guests here today in this conversation. Dr. Aparna Pandey, she's joining me from Washington, D.C. She is the director for the India Initiative at the Hudson Institute, also an author who has, has books from Chanakya to Modi, as well as the new one, Making India Great, in fact, which was launched recently. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Pandey.
Thank you, Smita. Wonderful to be here.
Thank you. I'm also joined from Delhi by a man who wears multiple hats, a retired career diplomat who served as India's ambassador to France, has played a very proactive role, in fact, in the past when it came to multilateral, global, in fact, trade organizations. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, who's also the chairman for RIS, the Research and Information Center for Developing Countries. He's also the Dean for International Affairs and professor at Tyndall Global University. Glad to have you here, Ambassador Kumar.
Thank you, Smita. Thank you.
You know, if I could just start it off by a very specific question, Dr. Pandey, before we go on to the broader issues, because recently at the US ISPF annual forum, we saw Piyush Goyal come up and make those comments where he said that the likelihood is very strong that the trade deal that we have been talking about, a limited trade deal between India and the US for very long now, which was expected to be signed when Donald Trump visited India in February this year, but it wasn't, that this could possibly be inked now before the November polls. What's your sense on
it? Smita, I mean, I'm one of those who's not sure that a trade deal, mini or minor, will be signed in the coming months. I would make 3 points. I mean, one, what is possible is that the US could sort of, could give back India the GSP plus, the privileges which were taken away. Because that would be about $6 to $8 billion. And that is something which an executive order had taken away, and the president can do that in the next coming month or two. And it would seem like a mini deal. The problem with a bigger trade deal is that we live in a time when both India and the US are, nationalist and protectionist. It is very difficult for you to align America First policy with giving privileges against a country that you have called tariff king, and against whom there are a number of issues which you have, everything from, agricultural subsidies to, intellectual property rights to tariff and other duties. So it's difficult for the American president to do it in the next 2 months. Will it happen in the next administration, whether it's Biden or Trump? I don't know. But I don't see it happening right now. On India's side, it's difficult as well. Right. Indian economy has suffered. For India, some of the tariff and other duties are important to protect its own farmers and its own manufacturers. So it's very difficult to give up at a time when you have to show that you are standing up and you are rebuilding your own economy.
Right. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, would you agree with Dr. Pandey's skepticism at this point, given that, it's not like trade with India in particular is going to be a major election issue for the US electorate, really. But even by all, by all parameters, the fact that the slogan is still Make America Great Again or Make in America, where does the trade deal with India really fit into it in the upcoming months?
So I would be surprised. I hesitate using the word skeptic as Dr. Aparna Pandey did, but I would be extremely surprised if there was a deal before the elections. I think, as she rightly says, there are complications here, complications there. My sense is that the file or the dossier has got a bit overloaded as well. It's not just GSP now. There is a digital tax, a digital services tax, which has now come in. And the United States has taken a position vis-a-vis France, where they're trying to impose punitive tariffs in response to France's imposition of digital services tax. We've already done that by calling it, I think we call it an equivalent duty or something, but it's essentially a digital services tax. We have tried hard explaining to the US that it is not aimed at Google, and Amazon, but I don't think that's washing very much. So I really think the quarter of next year is when, and the most important thing for me, I don't know if I'm anticipating your next question, is really the issue of United States now lumping us with China and saying we are both not entitled to be developing countries. I mean, that is an argument that is shocking for an ex-trade negotiator like me. I mean, you're comparing apples and oranges. Everybody knows they are a 13 trillion economy and we are a 2.7 trillion economy. So that is something on which we need to impress on the next administration, whichever that might be, to tell them. And for me, because of the impending multilateral negotiations on fisheries, we simply have to get that developing country status back. I don't think we can afford to negotiate in the WTO. You know, if the US says we're going to treat you like China, we're going to treat you like anybody else, it's just not possible. So that is for me a critical issue. Everything else, I believe we can sort it out. This is extremely critical and on which I don't see Lighthizer relenting at all. If you see the article that Lighthizer has written in the recent op-ed in Wall Street, he's against FTAs actually. He's saying, and it's quite shocking in that sense, I was surprised. He says, I'm against FTAs now and I'm in favor of bilateral deals. So he thinks that FTAs, you're giving too many concessions on an MFN basis to everybody and everybody takes advantage of it. So I broadly agree with Dr. Pandey.
But when it comes to the US trade representative Lighthizer that you're mentioning about, or Donald Trump, we know that their positions on business, on certain aspects of trade, immigration, actually have been consistently pretty hawkish since the 80s and the 90s. You know, it's not an overnight development. So if Trump were to return to power on issues of GSP, on issues of LDC, do you really have a hope for the administration doing a U-turn on it? Or do you see Biden bring something substantially different to the table that he promises to India, Ambassador Kumar?
So if the Trump administration comes back, scenario one, I'm not necessarily, you know, wagering or anything, I'm just arguing hypothetically. So if that is one scenario, I see as a situation where India will try to do a deal with them. The question will be to get my SND, special and differential treatment or developing country status back. What do I need to buy from the US? So that is the conversation that needs to happen. There, the only point I would make is you're absolutely right. USTR has held this view from the 80s. I think we need to kick the conversation up now. I mean, I'm going to be a typical foreign service, ex-foreign service officer and say that trade is too important an issue to be left to the USTR. I'm going to say that. And I think we'll have to have the Prime Minister and the President sit down and do it. If the Biden administration comes to power, then we have different kind of issues. There may be a chance that WTO gets revived, and then we try to kind of have an alliance, either a group of countries or bilaterally try and tell them that, listen, we will sit with you, we will do business, but don't do this, you know, don't take away special differential treatment, don't take away GSP. But there will be other issues. For example, I see them as being much tougher when it comes to labor standards, environmental standards, and they will include all those in the WTO. The Democrats have traditionally been attached to the use of trade to prosecute environmental and labor standards, and they will do that. So you will have different kinds of issues, but this has now become an existential issue. This issue, I said, of India being a developing country, because fishery subsidies, we give a lot of subsidies as fuel for our fishermen. And those are attracting a lot of adverse attention in the WTO. So the conversation will, I think, be a little different, but the challenge will be the same. You will still need to convince the Americans that this is important for you. You'll have to also understand what they want in return.
You know, Dr. Pandey, I was speaking to Ambassador Meera Shankar recently, the former envoy to the United States, and she seemed to suggest that, look, India also needs to prioritize its bread butter issues. You can have this bonhomie between a Donald Trump and Narendra Modi play out in Houston, in Ahmedabad. But the fact is that the Trump administration actually has taken such steps which have hit in India's core competence areas, you know, be it on immigration, be it on H-1B visas. So would you say that, you know, that that's going to remain a problem area if Trump were to return to power?
Yes, I agree with Ambassador Shankar in the sense that if President Trump returns to power, then since he cannot become president again, it's his last 4 years in power, he is going to adopt one of two, and most likely one policy, which is that he will continue to do things which he has cared about since the 1980s or 1990s. Immigration matters to him. So as of now, most of what he has done is executive orders, because it's the Congress which can actually implement immigration reform, not the executive in the US. But he will try to undertake more policies to restrict immigration, whether it's H-1B and L-1s, or it's green cards, or it's even student visas.
Their funds.
So it's like, you know, it's the entire gamut to try and change immigration. That is going to be important for him. And he will continue that, and that is going to hit India. It's going to hit India not just because, you know, Indians come here to study and work, but because our remittances will be hit, and the relationship we have built over the years. Second, building the US economy is important for him. Protectionism is something he believes in. He does believe that the US has been taken for granted on the security front by its allies in Europe and East Asia, but also by other countries on the economic front. So I don't see him changing the economic policies. And so India will have to India will have to do more if he comes back, and will have to give more than it has given up till now over the next 4 years. And that's going to hurt us at a time when India's economy will need a big boost to recover from the 24% drop in the last quarter. I agree, you know, when an economy is shut down, it will collapse. But the question is, you need a boost to revive the economy for the next few years. We have to grow at 8 to 10%. We cannot grow at 2.5, 3 or less than that. So, you know, it's a time when we need revival. We would need a country like the US to actually help us rather than push us into a corner. There would be a difference with the Biden administration. I do agree with Ambassador Kumar, but I would say that, you know, on immigration, there will be a difference. The Democrats do want to change immigration policy, but they don't go after students, or they don't have a problem with the H-1B, L-1. They have a different, you know, they want the dreamers, and there are other things they want to do. And there will be some changes over time. But the immigration side will be easier for us. And yes, on trade, it will be more WTO, and FTAs rather than but I mean, the data privacy will hit us irrespective of who's there. Google will still complain, and so will Amazon and others.
So, okay, Ambassador Kumar, taking that question forward, I mean, you know, when staying with the immigration issue, we have heard some favorable comments coming in from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris combined, saying that they may actually increase the cap on green card holders or H-1B visas, the visas for H-1B spouses, which was effectively, in fact, increased during the Obama-Biden administration itself. Are you hopeful that if that happens, that perhaps could actually strengthen, especially when it comes to Silicon Valley, the Indian tech firms? How important will that front be?
That will be important. I mean, as you know, we have been arguing with the Americans for what is known as a totalization agreement. You know, this is, what is one of the most, insidious aspects of temporary Indians working in Europe and America, not just America, everywhere, is that you still have a huge deduction from your salary for social security in those countries, knowing fully well you're not going to spend a lifetime. You're going to spend 5 years. So we've struggled to do this with Europe. I know Europe well because I served there. But I know it's a big issue with the United States as well. And I know Minister Piyush Goyal has raised it with Robert Lighthizer. So I think with the Democratic administration, I'm thinking not just the immigration of highly skilled immigration, I think, will find favor with the Biden administration. That is how I interpret what Dr. Pandey is saying. But we need to also sort out this totalization agreement. This has been a huge drag on the relationship. So we need to do that as well. So again, to go back to my original point, I don't see the dossier getting lighter.
Okay.
So I'm a Puritan. I spent a long time negotiating. I'm a Puritan. I feel, you can have a mini deal, but we are making too much of a mini deal. You can't have a mini deal with two things. I undertake to buy Californian apples, Californian almonds, and you will buy some drugs from here. That's not a deal for me. I mean, I think if we have made up our mind that we need at some point to have something close to an FTA with the United States, that they are now your strategic partner, they are invested in Quad, then you go ahead and do it. Thing I would be interested in, which Americans will understand because they are transactional, tell them whatever concessions I give you, I do not want to give this to the rest of the world because that India can't afford. In the past, we have had to make concessions to the United States. We had to extend it on an MFN basis to everybody else. And the Chinese and others have frankly benefited. The Americans know this. So I think if we can narrow this to whatever the United States wants and give it only to the US, don't do it on an MFN basis. And there is a perfect opportunity now because I never thought I would say this, but anyway, the WTO faces an existential crisis. Nobody believes in an MFN anyway.
Right.
I would argue in favor of a purely bilateral deal, but I say then go ahead and have a roadmap for the FTA. What are you worried about? This is your strategic partner. In every other area, you're making progress, and this is really acting as a huge drag on the relationship. But this needs a decision at the very highest levels in both countries, especially India, because there are people I think who feel that we can never do an FTA with United States because of agriculture, because Americans are such a super agricultural power and we have issues, as you know. I think there are ways to get around this, frankly.
Okay, but much will also depend, of course, the approach that New Delhi takes on the subject and its negotiators on the table. But Dr. Pandey, Ambassador Kumar mentioned about the Chinese. They're benefiting from some of the, basically, the factors on the table that India has to open up for the US. But when it comes to the US-China trade war today and the way you see it under the Trump administration, there has been a lot of dialogue going on whether this upping the ante is basically something that we will see only till November, or will it continue? But there does seem to be an agreement that there is a strong bipartisan anti-China sentiment today in the Congress. So regardless of who comes in, if the US-China trade decoupling were to happen at a greater pace, not just talking about applications being deleted or Chinese games not being downloaded, what do you see the pitfalls for India there?
So I agree with you. I mean, I do believe that irrespective of who comes to power, whether it's a Biden administration or Trump administration, the pressure on China will continue because at a strategic level, there is a US-China.
Right. Dr. Pandey, I can't hear you. Your audio, could you just... can't hear you, Aparna.
Competition or economic competition between US and China will have an impact on India. And the impact on India will be that, it's very easy to delete an app. As you said, Smita, it is more difficult to stop something at your port, which has even 1% of an item imported from China. India has learned that, and so has the rest of the world. Almost every gadget we use, from my iPhone to my Mac laptop is manufactured in China, some portion of it. So it while the US does have the ability to convince to rebuild manufacturing and actually convince its allies from Taiwan and South Korea and Japan all across Southeast Asia and India and other countries to start manufacturing, the problem will be that, let's take the example of decoupling in India. India's argument is decoupling should benefit Indian manufacturing. But all three of us know that in India, manufacturing is most of the focus goes to MSMEs, right?
Right.
So if you don't provide, economies of scale, why will companies from Japan and US move to India? They would rather go to Vietnam and Philippines. So you're not actually India's problem is going to be that how is India, what are the reforms India is going to undertake, which will encourage companies to come to India and boost Indian manufacturing, which will help India actually stand up to China.
Okay.
And actually be a part of this decoupling and standing up to China. I mean, deleting apps is the easiest thing to do.
Right. Okay, so I'll just take a final comment from you, Ambassador Kumar, then. I mean, recently at a column, one of the professors of political science at Western Washington University wrote that the Trump administration has largely treated India as a cash register for American defense contractors. Would you say that, of course, we say that Trump has been transactional, but when it comes to India on trade, on economy, how do you really rate the Trump administration's past 4 years?
So pluses and minuses, as with everything in life, it's very difficult to view this as black and white. The plus side is with the Trump administration, what you see is what you get. He tells you what he wants. You make a calculation. Can you give him Harley Davidson vehicles? I'm just saying, and a few things like this, get something in. So that is the easy part. But we have a fundamental imbalance in the relationship. And regardless of Biden or Trump, I'm saying the onus is on India to sort this out. And that is that the strategic part of the relationship is galloping ahead and the trade side is getting left behind. And whether you like it or not, regardless of who the president is, it will be a drag and this will affect us. So 2 or 3 things we can do. We can persuade the Americans that maybe one way of doing this is please also take into account the Boeing planes we are buying from you. Don't talk about apples and almonds. I think that is one thing you can do. But eventually, if you're going to talk of resilient supply chains and Quad plus, how can you do this without the United States? You have to. So I think it is in India's long-term fundamental interest to sort out the trade dossier is what I'm saying. In fact, I've been crying myself hoarse that all our FTAs are to the east. We don't have a single FTA to the west.
Right.
And your major partners are US and EU.
Right.
Why do you think Vietnam is signing an FTA with EU? It's very competitive. And this is going to hurt India, frankly.
Right.
You may love the Vietnamese, but I think they're going to take you to the cleaners when it comes to exporting textiles, garments. In every area, they will now have the upper hand vis-a-vis EU. So I think in our own interest that we do this with US and EU. That's been my line all along. Thank you.
India needs to really smell the coffee on where it stands on these negotiations. I'll let you have the final word, Dr. Pandey, because, as your book points out, it's the promise of a reluctant global power. Do you see India sort of shedding off this reluctance? Because, when it comes to taking a hard stand under this government, we've seen the extreme stand of pulling out of an RCEP. And even today, Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla mentioned that the only backdrop for any sort of FTAs or preferential trade agreements has to be national interest. So if these FTAs are something that India requires for its national interest, why is India being reluctant on the table? Sorry, can't hear you again, Aparna. Your audio is going off. And can you just push your headphone? Yeah, I think your headphone is a bit loose.
I think it's the Zoom. For some reason, the internet is unstable. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I would actually echo something Ambassador Kumar said, which is that it's a political decision. At the end of the day, Delhi needs to Delhi and DC and Washington need to take a political stance on, why is it that the economic side is so far behind the strategic dimension. But I would in response to your question, I would say, I still see India as being reluctant. I still see India as being as not wanting to make up its mind. And I would just say, I mean, recently, I mean, today's images of the Indian defense minister and Chinese defense minister meeting an SCO and having a conversation. The Indian foreign affairs minister has said that, you know, the negotiation is the way out with China. I don't believe negotiation is the way out of China. India will need to demonstrate to China that we are a rival that China needs to be afraid of and aware of before China backs off anywhere along the border, whether it's maritime or land. And I don't see that happening as yet.
Okay, that's of course another subject of debate by itself, with a lot of experts actually believing that it's high time that India imposes a significant cost on China, be it militarily or economically. But that's, as I said, that's for another day for us to debate. But for now, definitely, I think one of the key themes that has been consistent every time India has been spoken about, especially in terms of its role on the global stage, has been a certain reluctance or a reticence, and much depends on New Delhi itself, regardless of whether it's a Trump or Biden who comes back into White House. But appreciate you joining us for this conversation today, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, as well as Dr. Aparna Pandey from Washington, DC. And if you tuned into this conversation, many thanks. Take care and goodbye.